So, I have a story about when my girlfriend and I broke up back in the late 90s. I'm happily married now with a kid, so it doesn't bother me as much to talk about it, but there was a point in time where this story really bothered me. Not because it was super creepy, but because this person I was in love with was so quick to turn, well, crazy. A small bit of context. This was the late 90s. I was about 23 at the time of this happening. I was dating this girl named Maddie, and I was genuinely in love with her. We'd been dating for 2 years at the time of all this. We didn't live together, but we did stay at each other's place a few times. She still lived with her parents, which made that a bit awkward, but there was nothing beyond that. We hadn't spoken about our future together or anything like that. We didn't mention marriage or kids, and at no point was there any indication, at least for me, that she was unhappy with things. As far as I could tell, we were a decently happy couple. We were still young, still had a lot going on in life, and we saw each other pretty frequently. I was happy with how it was, and sure, I wanted to consider moving forward with her, maybe moving her into my place to see how that went, but I wasn't in any rush, and I thought that would be a future issue. And the story starts in the dumbest way, with a scratch-off ticket. I had stopped at a gas station to fill up my tank one night, and for some dumb reason, I had bought a few scratch-off tickets. Much to my surprise, I had actually stopped in exactly when fate wanted me to, and I won something like $200. It wasn't much, but it was more than I'd ever won in a lottery, so I was over the moon. My immediate thought was, I should take Maddie on a date night, thinking I should go ahead and blow this $200 on a nice dinner and a movie or something. Just something to show that I appreciated her. So the next day I called her and we were talking about things, and I mentioned that we should go out that Friday. I made a comment about how the universe wanted us to splurge a little, mentioning that I had won the money on the scratcher, and she laughed and said something about it being fate. Nothing that was said was a red flag. I thought we were both joking when we were saying these things. Come to find out, Maddie was pretty well dead set on the idea of it being fate. Something I would come to find out that Friday night. So, I got dressed up in my nicest clothes, which weren't nice to be honest. Again, I was a dumb kid still at that point. I called Maddie and told her I was on my way, and then went to pick her up. She looked great. She was dressed up way beyond what I was, and I was elated that we were going to spend this time together. We decided on dinner first, that we would go eat and then check out what was playing at the theater, which sounded like a solid plan to me. She wanted to go to a decently expensive place. I agreed, told her that it was a great idea, and we headed out to eat. We got to the restaurant, I played the gentlemanly role and opened her door for her, and we walked to the front with our arms linked. Basically, we were pretending to be a wealthy couple that was madly in love, which is exactly what I wanted to do that night. We sat down, we ordered, and we talked about whatever it was that we talked about. She even ordered a glass of wine to, quote, celebrate the occasion, which was a weird thing for her to say at the time, but I didn't think much of it. We ate our food, and around the end of the meal, the waiter came with the check. I remember making a joking comment about, "Oh, allow me to get that, my dear," just being silly. I put the money in the check thing, handed it back to the waiter, and told them to keep the change, and then made a comment about how we should get going so we could check out what movies were playing. I started to stand up, and she reached out and grabbed my hand, letting out a slight chuckle while staring at me with this look of expectation. I sat back down and stared at her for a moment, just awkwardly sitting in silence, until a few moments later when her smile faded. I asked her what was wrong, if everything was okay, and she looked back to me and asked, "Aren't you forgetting something?" I looked around at the table and then around the restaurant trying to figure out what she meant. I even checked my pocket to make sure that I had my wallet, then looked at her and said, "No, I have everything." She just stared at me like I had kicked her dog. Like me saying no was the equivalent of me telling her that I hated her and wished she was dead. And to her, maybe it was, but to me, I was just confused about what it was I was forgetting. We sat there just staring at each other for an uncomfortable amount of time, before I asked her what she actually meant. Her face became angry and she stood up and basically stomped off like a child out of the restaurant. I followed her because I was so confused about what I had done wrong. She got to my car and immediately yelled at me to take her home. I asked her what about the movie, and she threw out several expletives about how she didn't want to go to the movies, that she just wanted to go home. I said okay, and just got in the car. The second I got the car on the road, she started in on me, yelling about how I was a manipulative a-hole, how I was a jerk, how she hated me. Just so many things that made zero sense to me. I asked her what the hell I had done and why she was so mad, and she screamed something at me that I never could have expected. "You didn't propose to me like you were supposed to." I stared out at the road, my jaw clenching. She then mentioned that I had said that it was fate, that we were supposed to be together, that she expected me to propose because of my comment about the universe wanting us to go out on this date, and that by not proposing, I had manipulated her. I want to reiterate that we had been dating for 2 years, and she had never acted like this. We'd had small arguments, but she was always very reserved, and they never turned into shouting. I told her that I never said anything about proposing to her, that my universe comment was a joke because I had randomly won a little bit of money, so we could afford an expensive date, not that I wanted to get married. She started yelling about how I was supposed to propose, that we were supposed to be getting married, and then asked me if I even wanted to get married to her. Apparently, I hesitated to answer too much, because it was less than a second or two later when I felt the stinging blast of pepper spray in my face. Yes, in her infinite wisdom and anger, because I didn't immediately say I wanted to marry her, Maddie grabbed her pepper spray off of her bag and blasted me, the person driving the car at 40-ish miles per hour, in the face. Of course, we were in the car together, with the windows up, so she got hit by it too. I don't really know what her end goal was other than to just kill us both in a fiery car crash. I panicked because I couldn't see or breathe, and I tried to brake and swerve out of the road as quickly as I could, just to stop myself from smashing into another car. I ended up hitting a light pole, thankfully not at full speed. Neither of us were hurt. My airbags didn't even deploy, but my car had a good amount of damage to the front end. I jumped out of the car, gasping for air and trying to figure out what to do with my eyes. Maddie did the same, but even though she was dealing with the blowback from shooting pepper spray in a closed area, she was still screaming about how this was all my fault, how I had ruined her life. While I was standing there and trying to compose myself, I looked over and saw the red and blue lights flash as a cop pulled up. That was fun, trying to explain the whole thing to the officer. I tried to tell him that we were dating, that we'd had an argument, and that she'd blasted me with pepper spray. She was screaming incoherently in between coughing fits about how I had ruined her life, that she hated me, and so forth. Thankfully, my calm demeanor won out over my anger, because the officer didn't take any action against me. They helped me to get a tow truck out to the scene, and were able to get us back to my place. When he left, I asked Maddie if she wanted to come inside to talk about it, but she actually slapped me and told me that she had wished I had died when we crashed, then started walking. I know the right thing to do would have been to stop her and tell her not to walk home. It was a pretty good distance, several miles, but I didn't care anymore. I told her to have a nice life, and I went inside my apartment. Then I took a shower and went to bed. Then I woke up the next morning to someone banging on my front door. When I answered it, it was Maddie's dad, and Maddie was standing there behind him crying her eyes out. I asked what he wanted, and he started yelling at me about how I had almost killed his daughter with my irresponsible driving, that I should have driven her home, blah blah blah. When he was finished, I simply asked him if she had told him that she pepper sprayed me while we were driving and that was why we had crashed, and that when the tow truck got us here, she slapped me and walked away when I invited her in, so that she didn't have to walk home. He paused, looked back at her, and asked, "Why did you pepper spray him?" Since she wasn't answering, I did. I told him about how she was mad because I didn't propose to her at dinner, so she maced me. He looked shocked at the whole thing, which told me that she hadn't told him about any of it. He asked her if that was true, and she just nodded slightly. He looked back at me, then her again, and let out a heavy sigh before mumbling an apology and leaving. I'm not sure what she expected out of that situation, but it definitely did not go her way. Thankfully, that was the end of our relationship. She tried to call me to apologize, but I just told her that she could have killed us both with what she did, and that I couldn't be with someone that was so willing to do something so stupid over such a small disagreement. And that was that. Thankfully, I wasn't hurt, and she wasn't hurt. But we both now have knowledge of what it's like to be pepper sprayed. I ended up shelling out a good amount of money on my car to get all that fixed. The damage wasn't too extensive, so it was what it was. I moved on, found someone else, and now I'm married and very happy with my family. I hope that Maddie found her soulmate, and that they believe in fate like she does, and that she never decided to mace another boyfriend for not asking her to marry him at the exact time that she expected it. Hi, Raven. I just discovered your channel, and this experience I had at work was one of a kind, to me. I've struggled being able to find a platform, and the stories you share are incredible. Thank you. Some background. I'm a caregiver. The title is specifically Direct Care Provider for individuals with developmental disabilities. And I look after these people in homes, not called group homes, but ISLs. The most least restrictive environment possible. The extent of my care depends on the person, from complete care to simply looking out for them like they were a child, treating them with as much dignity and respect as anyone else. I love my job. I've made so many great memories with all of those that I've looked after. I get to work in a regular house instead of your standard work environment. The work is, for the most part, easy. It almost becomes a home away from home, and you get familiar with the layout of the home quickly. My 8 months working there, I swore that I had sensed or seen something always from the corner of my eye, but I never thought it could have really been a spirit. Until this night. The story happens in the first ISL I ever worked at back at 2016. I was quite new to the field, but got the hang of it easily. It was a 5-bedroom house with 2 levels. 3 bedrooms were upstairs and 2 down the hall just across from the staircase. It was an open concept floor plan. We had 4 individuals under our care, and the ratio was 2-to-1. So I always worked with someone. I was in my 8th month working this field in this house, and was quite familiar with all of whom lived here, and who my coworkers were. As this was a while ago, some circumstantial details are fuzzy now, but not much. This particular night, I accepted a night shift last minute as relief staff couldn't come in. These ISLs require 2 staff to be present 24/7, day and night. I'm happy to help, It's a pretty house, and I'm good at keeping myself busy with so much downtime. The only thing this company demanded is, do not fall asleep. To make sure of this, they warn us in training that house managers, sometimes directors, will enter the homes in the middle of the night to inspect, and to be sure that we are not sleeping. Did I mention we aren't allowed to lock the doors? Sometimes when management did this and found staff asleep, they'd go into the medicine room and take medications and promptly leave. I guess this was to teach us that someone can come in and break in and steal drugs at any moment, so be on our guard. Looking back at this now, this was a major red flag. The work environment was definitely borderline toxic, and I was dealing with a few moral dilemmas about whether I wanted to keep working there. I had witnessed a coworker screaming at an individual under our care. This is relevant. They were screaming at this person to eat their food. When the individual got up feeling anxious, getting screamed at to eat, my coworker ended up cornering them and they accidentally knocked something over and broke it. It was then marked off as a behavioral incident in documentation. Absolute broccoli salad. It was 100% staff-induced. These people are vulnerable as they cannot defend themselves. They don't have the freedoms we do as they cannot drive. We handle their medication. We help them get dressed. We bathe them. We cook them meals. I remember stepping away to go to the bathroom and crying, feeling terrible for what I had just stumbled across. Our job is to protect these people, not scream at them. I reported my coworker, and instead of getting fired like they were supposed to, they were moved to a different ISL. Great. But just my luck, this coworker was with me the night of my story. We had staffing shortages and they figured it was safe since it was night. I was job hunting at this point because I could not work for a company that was so shady. Abuse charges can blacklist you and get you into serious legal trouble. And I was scared of getting thrown under a bus, framed, just something. It was 10 p.m. All the individuals of the home were fast asleep, and my coworker was in the living room feeling ill. They were complaining of chest tightness. Great. I was in the visiting room directly across from the stairs. I was lounging on the couch after a long day in my phone watching YouTube. Night shift involved plenty of downtime, which was great. With this said, I was of sound body and mind. I had nothing in my system, and it wasn't too late. I wasn't drowsy. My face was on a screen watching a top 10 video. From just the peripheral of my vision, in the dimly lit house, there was a thin young man, no older than 19, that came down the stairs. His dark hair was clean and parted to one side. As I remembered the rules, doors unlocked, managers even from other ISLs can stop by at any time, especially at night, I thought nothing of it, as they did sometimes hire people fresh out of high school as house managers. I simply assumed he was one of these managers doing an inspection. This man had come down the stairs, turned without looking, and said, "Hello," quite formally, like he just wanted to let me know he was there. Then immediately turned down the hall like he was going to check on a sleeping individual. At this point, I was thinking, oh crap, my shoes are off and I was caught looking at my phone at work. Which was silly, honestly, because nobody cared if you were on your phone at work with everyone else sleeping. Still, I scrambled to put my sore feet back into my shoes and got up to follow in case they had any questions. To my surprise, he hadn't come back from turning into the hallway. There is no back door on that side of the home, just 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. I thought to myself, maybe I missed him. Maybe he already moved to the living room and then the medicine room to inspect that. So I go and ask my coworker on the couch where the young man went, and she was confused. The back door was in the kitchen, which was visible where we were standing. The living room and kitchen were only divided by a long kitchen island counter, so if anyone had walked in, they would have definitely heard them coming in. She asked me if I was sure I saw someone, and I said yes. Both of us looked for this phantom house manager in all the bedrooms and even outside. Nobody was there. That was also when I realized that this man had walked. His steps had been silent. My coworker started laughing at that point, teasing me about seeing a ghost. I don't think she believed me. I could tell by how dismissive she was, but to this day, I swear that's what I saw. I've spoken to a few other people about my experience, and they suggested that, perhaps, this young man knew I was planning on leaving soon and wanted to make his presence known before I left. I think he knew something I didn't yet, but knew that I could see him if he wanted me to. I've now since changed companies, and the environment here is so much better. No toxic micromanaging, no spontaneous visits in the middle of the night or possible medication theft, no abuse, or at least none that I've witnessed. This wasn't my first encounter seeing or sensing a ghost, but it was the most visual experience I ever had. Fast forward to present day, I work every Saturday overnight at this new company and at the same ISL, and I've been there since 2017. Every now and then I've caught something or someone moving in the corner of my eye. Sometimes I hear footsteps when everyone is asleep. This is a house, not an apartment, so it can't be a neighbor. Another ISL that I visited, I swear the basement is haunted. The presence wasn't as friendly, so I didn't stay there long. You get this sense, this feeling, you know? Also, one thing I want to mention is that I'm a school bus driver. In 2022, the morning after my father died, I briefly saw a shadow the shape of a man in my passenger mirror. It was sitting in a seat, but then vanished in the blink of an eye. I hadn't checked my phone yet to hear the voicemail message from my stepmother telling me he'd passed. He was 58 and died of Alzheimer's. Way too young. I had lost my mom back in 2014, so I was officially parentless at 30. My dad loved watching ghost story shows on TV, so of course he had to mess with me one last time. I don't know why these little encounters happen. I'm not exactly a medium. I get the occasional flash image in my head, or sometimes I feel or hear a message that nearly feels telepathic. My dad wasn't pleased when I told my husband how I felt, how he was such a man-child in life. He was. I was woken from a dead sleep from someone giving me some choice words, but that could have been a dream. It just hits me without notice and sometimes at random while awake. And I know it's not coming from me, but from somewhere or someone else. I apologize. This is becoming a rambling session, but I'm just trying to make sense of it all. Maybe this man I legit saw knew that I could see, and just wanted to open my eyes. For whatever reason why, I'm thankful. I've endured a lot of loss, and I'm going to see more of it in days to come. It makes me feel more connected to those I've lost, knowing that they aren't far away. School was a pretty average thing for me as a kid. I didn't get overly excited to go unless there was a class party or a field trip, but I also didn't hate it. To me, it was just something I knew I had to do, and I did my best at it. I did enjoy bringing home my work to show my parents so I could be praised for it, but, again, that was as a young child. I'm talking elementary school. My sister, however, was 2 grades below me, and she loved it. She was always ready and willing to get up in the morning and nearly dragged me to the bus stop with her. We got along quite well, though, and to this day, I would still do anything to protect her or help her, so it wasn't a problem. But when my parents started arguing more, to the point that it would upset my sister Paige, I was happy to get out of the house and go to school. It was a relief at that point. It wasn't every day, but it started getting close to almost every day, so I would get up early so we could leave earlier, even if it meant that we waited outside a little bit longer than normal. School kind of became my escape. I could talk and hang out with my friends. I had to do work, which kept my mind occupied. It honestly started becoming my favorite thing, and weekends were the worst. But during my 3rd grade year, something happened that messed me up mentally, and there is still part of me that has not gotten over it. It started as a normal day. I woke up, checked to make sure Paige was up, and got ready for school. I went to make myself breakfast when my mother made a remark about being low or out of something, which spiraled from there. They started arguing, and it was only a matter of time before it escalated. I grabbed a few packages of Pop-Tarts and waited in my room until Paige came out. Once she was ready, we walked to the stop to start our day. School itself went fine. It was right before recess and I needed to use the restroom. I got the pass from my teacher and walked away. This way I wouldn't have to stop during our break. I spent a little longer at the sink. I remember letting the water run down my hands like a waterfall. I was very young, like I said. I finally came back to reality when I heard the familiar buzz of the intercoms pinging on. The voice told all staff to check their emails, and that this was not a drill. I didn't think too much about it. I just finished washing and drying my hands and walked out of the restroom. But once I was out in the hallway, something felt off. Normally around that time, I might see a different class coming or going from recess, or even another teacher or staff walking the halls. But it was eerily silent and empty. I slowly walked down the hall, keeping my shoulder on the wall. When I reached my class, I tried the door and it was locked. I had to stand on my toes to look in the little window on the door, but from what I could see, the lights were off, and the room looked completely empty. There was normally a bell to tell us when we went to recess, and it never went off. I know that I didn't miss it, so I was confused as to where my class was. I began walking towards the door that we used to go outside, but not only was the door locked, but the playground was also completely empty. So where did my class go? At my age, I began to fear the unreasonable. I figured that maybe they all left and I was forgotten about. Or that maybe I was in the restroom longer than I thought I was, and school was over and I was left behind. I could tell that I was starting to panic and choked back tears, not wanting to cry. The only idea that I had left was to walk to the entrance and see if I could leave. As I got closer, I noticed the lady that was at the front desk was still there. I started walking towards her when she looked over and noticed me. Her eyes were wide and she immediately waved me over to her. She asked me if I was okay and where I had been. I told her what all happened, explaining my exact whereabouts. I also tried asking her where everyone was, but she just asked me to sit in the chair next to her desk. She had called someone on her phone and specifically mentioned, "I have him in the office." She then explained to the other person what I told her, followed by some one-sided response. I was relieved that I wasn't alone, but then I was also still terrified of the situation. Why was my classroom locked and empty? Why was I sitting in the office like I was in trouble? After she ended her call, she did something on her computer and then turned her attention to me. She was very kind and soft-spoken, as she always was. She asked me again if I was okay and if I knew what happened. I shook my head. She asked me if I saw anyone when I looked outside, and I again replied, no. Then she asked if I had seen my sister. I remember feeling ill at the moment. I was just a kid, but my little sister meant the world to me. Did something happen to her? Before I could ask why, she then asked me if there was anything going on at home, and specified scary people showing up or my parents fighting. I confirmed that they had been fighting, but I never saw anyone around that I didn't know, so her questions confused me. I was also confused as to how she would know anything about my parents fighting. She then told me that I would be remaining in the office with her and that my teacher would be bringing me my schoolwork. Again, I was terrified. Had I done something wrong? Was I in trouble? And why did she ask about my parents and sister? I sat at the desk working when I heard the bell finally go off for recess, and watched as some classes piled out of the rooms and outside, upset that I was missing out. My class, unfortunately, was around the corner, so I didn't see them. It would be my normal recess time anyways, so I remember spacing out at that point, doodling on some scratch paper. Anything really to just keep my mind occupied, when I started hearing the sound of walkie-talkies going off. 2 cops had entered the office, and the lady greeted them and walked outside the office to speak to them. I knew something bad was happening, and yet I still had no idea how I was involved. Shortly after, the 3 of them came back in the office, as well as the principal, who told me they needed to speak with me and that it was very important. I'm sure that he could tell I was about to cry, but he assured me that I wasn't in any trouble and that my mom was on the way. One of the cops then sat down next to me and asked me a few questions about myself, and then started asking about Paige. They asked me when I last saw her, if there was anything weird or scary going on at home, if I heard or saw anyone different than normal, and so forth. As they asked me these questions, I saw my mom enter the office and she immediately went to hug me. From there, everything seemed to move so fast. The cops asked my mom about my sister as well. They asked her about my dad, suspicious people, fighting at home, and I still did not know what was happening. Once they were done with the questioning, my mom took me home. The car ride was pretty silent, and I was too afraid to ask what was going on. That was until I got home and realized Paige wasn't there. I asked my mom about it, and all she said was that she would be home soon. I could tell by her voice that she did not want me to ask anything else, so I didn't. I just went to play in my room. Except my sister didn't come home that night, nor did my father. In fact, they didn't come home for a few days, and only then did my sister return. Turns out, my sister had been abducted at school, but her abductor was my dad. I remember being so confused and hurt as a child. Apparently, after my parents got into a huge fight, my dad threatened to take us and leave. But he only took my sister. One of the kids saw her reach over the fence for a man who picked her up and walked off. They then went and told the teacher and gave a description of the man. Unfortunately, being a child, he didn't have much of a description, so the adults didn't realize it was our dad. It wasn't until my mom explained very vaguely that it was my father that took her. She didn't really go into detail beyond that. So that left me wondering as to why my dad took Paige only and not me. Why did he choose her? Why would he not even say goodbye to me? I was hurt. I assumed my dad didn't love me and that was it. My mom loved both of us plenty and never made me feel like I was loved less, and I will always thank her for that, but sometimes the thought popped into my head about my dad. I never saw my dad after that. Neither of us did, for that matter. I learned when I got older that he did some time, but after that, we would ask to see him, but he was always too busy, nor didn't return our calls. My mom would let us call him ourselves, to show that she wasn't lying. I finally came to the conclusion that if he didn't want to put in the effort to see us, then neither would I, and I stopped trying after I turned 13. But I wanted to share this because that day in school, back in 3rd grade, was one of the scariest days of my life. The feeling of being left behind in school, being secluded in the office with the police, and then once again feeling left behind by my own father, who was also the reason for the school being on lockdown, it's not one that I have ever forgotten. Hi, Raven. I've been listening to your stories for some time now, and I feel like it's time to share my own. I'll start by saying that my family owns a cabin in the mountains in California. This cabin is not necessarily old or remote, for that matter, because it is surrounded by other cabins as well. I will say, however, that there are times when no neighbors are up there, and it can seem a little eerie and intimidating to be there alone. Now, to the main story. The first incident started when I thought my bedroom at the cabin was haunted. I shared this room with my twin brother, but after these events, I admittedly have chosen to never go in there anymore because it gives me the creeps. When I think about all the things that happened in that room, the first thing I remember are my nightmares. For context, I rarely get nightmares, and when I do, I'm never scared until I wake up and realize what was happening was weird or creepy. Because, and I feel like some of you can relate to this, when you're dreaming, you don't really question what's happening. You just accept it, if that makes sense. One night, I was trying to sleep in my room at the cabin. My brother was already asleep, my parents as well. This usually seemed to be the case because whenever I tried to go to sleep there, it always felt like something was watching me. I always felt unnerved. Eventually, I did fall asleep and had a terrifying dream. In this dream, I was surrounded by pitch-black darkness. I was looking around to try and make out if I could see anything else, when I spotted a figure turned away from me, some number of feet in front of me. They had a slender build with long black hair and pale skin, and some sort of garment that was off-white. For some reason, even though there wasn't any light source, at least that I could make out, this figure was completely visible. Now, because they were the only one or thing that I could see in this space of darkness, naturally yet cautiously I walked up to the figure. I reached my hand out with the intention of tapping them on the shoulder to grab their attention, yet the minute I reached out, the figure whipped around to face me while they screeched an ear-piercing scream right in my face. This dream startled me awake, and I noticed that my heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. This would not necessarily be odd because it's just a dream, right? Well, unfortunately, that wasn't the last dream that I had with this figure. My second dream happened probably a few years after this. I had dreamt that I was in a college dorm. At the time I had this dream, I was in middle school, and all of a sudden every building started panicking and scrambling to get out of the way. I didn't know what was happening until somebody yelled, "She's coming!" and I saw in the distance the same figure, now larger than in my previous dream, sprinting towards me, while clawing everyone in its way and chasing after the other people there. Without getting too graphic, it was trying to harm and kill everyone in the building. I ran back into my dorm and hid under a desk, but the figure came into my room and attacked my roommates. And then it turned to look at me and I woke up. These dreams really stuck with me because I never dreamed of anything violent like this. Usually when I dream, it's people who I know in real life. Yet, in these dreams, I didn't know anyone. Also, I don't know anyone in real life that looks like that figure. I will say that in both dreams, it seemed female. Not in the way that it looked, but it just gave off a kind of vibe that it was. Sorry, I know that's really vague. The next incident was definitely a bigger deal to me. It was coincidentally Christmas Eve at my cabin. I was trying to sleep in my bottom bunk while my brother was up top. I was facing the wall, my back was turned towards the middle of the room. It must have been about 12 in the morning at least, when all of a sudden I felt someone press their hand against my lower back. It didn't feel evil or like it had bad intentions. I'm not sure how to explain it, but I felt like if I saw the face of whomever or whatever was doing this, it would be smiling peacefully looking down at me in adoration. I know that sounds crazy, but that's what it felt like. Anyways, I was too scared to turn around or say anything because I felt like if I did, It would be an acknowledgement that I knew that the being was there. And I was scared that if I said anything, it would want to interact with me further, and I definitely did not want that. I know what most of you must be thinking. It's probably just sleep paralysis or a bad dream, but I have to say, I have never had sleep paralysis before or since that event. I felt like I could definitely move if I chose to. The difference was that I was too scared to move, not that I felt like I was paralyzed. Also, I'm 100% sure that I was awake. I know when I'm dreaming, okay? I digress. While this was happening, my heart was beating so fast, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my face, and I wanted to cry out of fear, but like I mentioned earlier, I didn't want the being to realize I was awake. Eventually, after trying to stay still, I just wound up falling asleep somehow. I managed to tell my whole family this in the morning, and none of them took me seriously at all. After that event, they have always teased me about how I won't go into the haunted room and such. Specifically, my mom. Here's where it gets really weird. Years after this event, now I'm in high school, my mom had come back from staying at the cabin with my dad. And she came up to me and told me, "Hey, Addie, I have to admit something to you." "Yeah," I said, already intrigued. "While me and your dad were at the cabin at night, I woke up to the feeling of someone pressing on my lower back." I was definitely skeptical of my mother saying this because she has been known to try and trick or scare the rest of our family as pranks, but I could tell that there was sincerity in her voice. Still, I asked her, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, it actually really freaked me out after that. Remember, sweetie?" She turned to my dad. "Yep, I do," he said simply. Before I could even say, "I told you so," my twin brother chimed in. "Oh yeah," he said excitedly as if he had just remembered something. "That happened to me a while back as well. I woke up and I felt like someone was touching me." I was definitely in shock and disbelief with this new discovery, but I was also pretty upset that no one believed me up until now. I find it weird, though, that my brother and mom had this happen while they were asleep and woke up to it. But for some reason, I was wide awake and was trying to go to sleep when my experience took place. I'm not sure what to make of this story, but I have told my close friends among other people, and I've gotten mixed responses. I also forgot to mention that this kind of creeped me out because it meant that it wasn't just my room that had some weird happenings in it. I asked one of my friends, and she thinks that my cabin might be haunted by an upset Native American spirit because the land of my cabin used to be native land, and maybe it's upset because it's been taken away. I'm not really sure. I'm honestly open to anything. As a side note, I kind of want to say that I feel like there are two beings there. One with bad intentions and one with good. My mom doesn't think that spirits can enter dreams, but to be honest, I sort of do. I'm just not really sure what to make of this or why this happened. In all honesty, it could just be a bunch of strange coincidences. There are some other things that I didn't mention before, like hearing footsteps when no one else was awake, or hearing little noises inside the walls. But I feel like that is less significant than what I already said. Anyways, thanks for considering this story, and I'm sorry that it's kind of all over the place. What's worse than having one of your neighbors stalk you when they still do it after they're dead? In 1991, I was living in a small one-bedroom apartment in Nampa, Idaho. The complex was shaped like an L with only 5 units on both sides. Back then, the rent was cheap, only $225 a month. If only we could bring that back. All but one of my neighbors were nice and kept the noise down. I was in my early 20s living alone, working an office job. I'd only been living there a couple of months before the trouble started. I would notice sounds of movement behind and around my apartment at all hours when I was home, off and on. I always kept my doors locked. The biggest giveaway was the time I finished a phone call and heard the scattering of gravel outside my bedroom window. I flipped the curtain aside and saw him. Some guy was hunched over and running away. I was irritated the stranger had been listening in on my phone conversation. It made me more nervous knowing that he was the same one who had been sneaking around trying to get glimpses of me through my window, through gaps in the curtains. I decided that if it escalated, I was gonna tell the landlady. Fast forward to the last month of September, I was watching TV when I heard a commotion of ambulances and fire trucks in the parking lot. I went outside to see my landlady smoking and staring at the scene. I tried asking a cop what was going on, but he said he wasn't allowed to tell me. But the landlady did. She said the young 20-something man 3 doors down from me had been fighting with 2 other women in the apartment. He had stabbed both of them, and then himself. I watched the ER team carry the bodies out to the ambulance and drive away. One of the bodies had been my peeping Tom. The spying stopped, or so I thought. 2 months later, I awoke to see a faceless, long, black, swirling, man-shaped cloud hovering above me. To make it creepier, he was looking back and forth from my face to my body. I knew what he was about to do, so I screamed at him to get off of me. He flew backwards into the wall behind me, and changed into a smaller, weaker version of a more solid shadow form until he disappeared into the wall. I slept out in the living room for a while. The last incident that made me move out was 3 weeks later. He woke me up by sitting on my bed. I could even feel his weight making my feet roll into him as he looked down to me. That did it. I moved out a couple of weeks later. I only saw him one more time 4 years later. My sister lived in that same complex and had a 1-year-old daughter. I babysat sometimes. She was in her crib in her room, and I sat on the living room couch reading, when I saw a faint shadow stand behind the light. This light sat in front of me on a tall stand, and had a dimmer switch. The light faded off and on slowly 3 times, and then the shadow stepped away to who knows where. Peeping Tom was back, and he remembered me. I never understood why he was so obsessed with me, but at least he doesn't follow me anymore. I wonder if he's still there, or if he moved on. There have been a lot more strange paranormal occurrences in my life, but that's just one example. Maybe I'll include those in another post, and thank you, Raven, for listening. I grew up in the deep woods of mid-coast Maine, in a town consisting of one small store, one smaller post office, and a population of fewer than 800 people, most of which were over the age of 60. The town was old and tired, and needless to say, there weren't many options in the way of exciting activities for young teens. My friends and I would often stay up all night and take sunrise walks, down familiar winding roads in the early hours of the morning. Golden Ridge Road, my road, earned its name in October as the trees lined the street with golden foliage. It was beautiful, but truthfully, these walks were motivated by stolen menthol cigarettes, 2 beers split 3 ways, and the occasional pinch of weed smoked through modified aluminum cans. It wasn't much, but it was something to do. One late night, when I was roughly 14 years old, 3 friends and I decided to take a sunrise walk down to a small field at the end of a long twisted road. The field was bordered by the road on one side and thick tree line on the other. In the field stood a tall, skinny tree in the dead center of the clearing. We took our time on the walk, stopping frequently, and by the time we got to the field, the sun had fully risen. To our shock, in the field was a young woman, roughly in her late teens, wearing a very old-style nightgown, 17th or 18th century, a bonnet and no shoes, frolicking and dancing at 5 a.m. Our first reaction was to pretend like we didn't see her so as to not scare her, or call attention to ourselves. Growing up in an extremely small town, you tend to get to know who lives nearby, and I had never seen this girl before. Not only was she under the age of 60, but she was also very beautiful. Myself being a lonely hormonal teenage boy, I would have remembered. Surprised and confused, we continued to walk when abruptly the girl stopped dancing. She looked straight at us and quickly sprinted to the lone tree in the center of the field. She appeared to be trying to hide from us, which seemed strange because we had clearly already seen her, and also because the tree was slightly too skinny to properly hide behind, especially with a wispy nightgown. We continued walking down the road, curiously peering at the stranger out of confusion, when all of a sudden she vanished. All four of us witnessed this girl go from unsuccessfully hiding to completely gone. Her frame went behind the skinny tree on one side and did not reappear on the other side. In disbelief, we began walking around the tree searching for any plausible explanation for the girl's whereabouts. We had no intention of scaring or harming her, but we had to investigate. Sure enough, she was gone. There were no low branches to climb the tree, nor were there enough leaves to conceal a person that somehow managed to shimmy their way up undetected. There was no cover above. Also, the forest that bordered the field was far too great a distance to make a run for it without being seen. Had she moved 1 foot towards the woods, we would have seen it. Upon telling the events of the night to my older brother, he noted that this area was a hotspot for brutal battles and slaughters between Native American tribes and early colonists of 17th century Maine. He said that many people died here, and the whole region is widely known to be haunted, especially the woods. Even if he was just trying to mess with me, every word he said was true. Was this girl a ghost? Was she a victim in those slaughters? Did she know she was dead? If it was a ghost, it seemed like she was having a good time before we showed up. Hopefully we didn't scare her. Hopefully she exists in a perpetual state of blissful freedom, only to occasionally be interrupted by teenage wannabe stoners. So, that's my ghost story. It's not as scary as it is interesting. Scary or not, I'm glad that I didn't witness this alone. Having friends to share this experience with made a world of difference in how I processed this event, and my mental well-being in general. My biggest fear is not to witness cryptids or the paranormal, but to witness them alone, leaving doubts to the grounds of your own sanity. Over the summer, our high school was going through renovations. They were completely remodeling the oldest part of the building, making some changes to the halls and adding a pool. A lot of us were pretty stoked because adding a pool meant we may have a swim team, and also may have swimming added to our PE classes. And I, for one, quite enjoyed swimming. They had completed the work on the main building, including putting in the pool by the time school started for the year. However, they had not finished the work on the old building. There was a long enclosed overpass that led to the older part of the building, and that part just had classrooms and the normal lockers in the hallway. They moved the anatomy and biology room out of there in order to install more modern supplies like better air vents. Since they had not finished that part of the building, they just had it blocked off with tape and cones. We were not allowed to go over there until it was completed. They even ripped out the lockers, so there was no reason for students to be there. For the first weeks, a lot of us discussed what all they may be doing. I know I've said it before, but most of the school was rebuilt and added on to the original to make it larger. But the west wing was still the old building, and there was a reason for it. They kept it that way as some sort of where we started versus where we are now type of sentimental element. So they kept the structure. I was curious if they were going to do anything other than repairs. A couple of my friends and I had stayed late at school to have free reign of the pool. We had joined the swim team, so we used it as an excuse to go swimming when at all possible. In between laps, we talked about that old part of the building, and just like that, with eye contact alone, we made plans to go check it out. We got out of the pool, dried off and dressed, and silently waited in the locker room, hoping the janitors and maintenance people might think we already left. They had walked by several times as we swam. I'm sure they were waiting for us to leave too. We gathered our backpacks and walked quietly to the overpass, making sure to not run into anybody. We had to shuffle into a nearby restroom once as we heard someone coming out of a classroom with a cart. We reached the overpass and slowly pushed the doors open just enough for us to shimmy through. They had under construction tape across the doors, so we didn't want to snap it, giving away that someone had entered. Once on the other side, we walked through the sunroom-like overpass and reached the other side where the floor was covered in plastic. I could smell fresh paint, which made sense with what we were seeing. All the doors to the room were propped open or missing altogether. There were some wires hanging down from the ceiling, where they were putting in new lights and intercoms. We pointed out previous rooms we had been in as well as memories from those classes. We took a right, wanting to go into an old room to see if the paper clips we slowly hung from the ceiling were still there. Surprisingly, they were still there. We stayed in the room, talking, reminiscing again, and trying to figure out how to get our paper clips back as our souvenirs. However, while we were talking, my friend Sam stopped mid-sentence, and his eyes were shifting around the room. The rest of us, there were 4 of us total, stopped and looked at him. "Did you guys hear that?" Sam asked us as he continued looking around. I didn't hear anything, and from the looks of my 2 other friends, they hadn't either. He said that it sounded like there was somebody groaning. We all paused and waited, but we didn't hear it, so we immediately started giving Sam a hard time about trying to scare us. But the look on his face told us that he was not playing around. He may have been the type to mess with us, but he could never keep a straight face. We all started walking out of the room when I heard it. There was definitely a groan. We all looked at each other to confirm that we weren't collectively hallucinating. We all wanted to find out what it was, so we headed further down the hall, away from where we had entered. We heard the groan once more, and it was obvious that we were walking towards it. But then we spotted something else. Blood. There was a streak of it along the hall and a small pool of it on the floor. What the hell had happened here? It was supposed to be closed off. Who or what was here? That's when my friend Isaiah tapped out. He said that he didn't want anything to do with it, so he agreed to wait at the entrance for us and headed back. So that left Sam, Keith, and myself to find out what had happened, even though we definitely should have headed back too. As we continued down the hall, we could clearly follow a trail of blood that seemed to stop in front of another room. Sam was getting pretty spooked too, so he said that he would wait in the doorway while we checked it out. I was gripping my phone pretty tight as I was using it as a flashlight, and I started bringing it up so I could prepare to call 911. That's when Keith nudged me and I looked up. The back of the room was lined with all the tables and chairs, and towards the front of the room was a body. It was a man, and from where we were, he looked dead. As we got closer, I knew who it was. It was our previous year's history teacher, Mr. Matheson, and when my light hit his face, he squinted his eyes and groaned again. The noises we were hearing were definitely coming from him, and from the looks of his stomach, so was the blood. We all freaked out. Sam took off. Keith kept asking me what to do, and I called 911. The operator was telling me what to do, and I was trying to explain to Keith what he needed to do. I quickly pulled out a spare shirt that I had in my bag and held it against the wound as instructed. It felt like forever with just the two of us. I was hoping that maybe the other two ran to get help or something, but they never came back. Luckily, the janitor was still in the building, and they helped the paramedics clear the doorway, and soon we heard wheels rolling and a lot of talking. They had arrived, and I was never more relieved than I was at that moment. They wheeled Mr. Matheson away, and Keith and I walked back to the doors where we entered, where we saw Sam and Isaiah, as well as the janitor and some cops. The cops were immediately suspicious of us and had already detained Sam and Isaiah, but the janitor apparently kept telling them that we were good kids, and they confirmed that we were the ones that had called it in. We had to sit there for a few more hours as we all individually had to tell two different cops what happened, what we saw and what we witnessed. Our parents arrived during this, thankfully, but I also don't know whose questioning I was more overwhelmed by. Once all was said and done and the teacher long gone, we were told we could leave with our parents as well. It was hard to sleep that night. It started as such a normal day. We went to swim practice, and instead of just going home or leaving, we decided to go where we shouldn't have. But because of that, we may have saved the teacher's life. I don't know if they did any work overnight, so they may not have found him until the next day. With the amount of blood we found him in, I'm not sure that he would have lived. Then I thought about how it happened. Was it self-inflicted? Did someone do that to him? And then it dawned on me. If someone did do that to him, who was it, and where did they go? How long ago even was it compared to when we found him? We were on the second floor, so it's possible he was still in there, and left using one of the sets of stairs. But what would have happened if they would have seen us? There were 4 of us, so surely we could have taken them down, but we were also still kids. I nearly gave myself a panic attack that night thinking about it. The teachers mentioned it at school the next day, and we all had to go to a school rally thing they held in the gym during big events or news. They didn't give out any names, but they explained what had happened the previous day and asked for anyone with information to come forward. That evening, my mom told me that she had heard about Mr. Matheson's condition. He lost a lot of blood, but he was going to be okay, and he wanted to thank us for saving him. My mom took Keith and I to see him that weekend, and he was seemingly back to how I remembered him, except he was smiling a lot more. He was typically a nice guy, but if you just saw him in passing, you would think he was pretty stern and intimidating. But he was a pretty cool teacher, and seeing him that day just made me think that no matter what, we did the right thing. Oh, and as things started calming down, we learned that Mr. Matheson was not coming back to the school, and the rumors started flying. Kids were talking about how he got fired, but all we were told was that he was moving on. Then they talked about what had happened that day. People were saying that it was a drug deal gone bad, but even after asking my parents about it years later, they claimed they have no idea or any additional information about what happened. Hopefully he wasn't involved in anything bad like people were saying. I'm just thankful that we were there to help, and maybe if he was involved in drugs or something worse, just maybe that was what he needed to kick it. I've been debating whether to share this for a while, but the more I think about it, the more I think I should. It's not terribly creepy until the end, but it's definitely a crazy X story, and maybe sharing it will be a good thing. I don't know, but either way, I'm sending it in now, so there's no turning back. This all happened about 2 years ago, back in 2022. A bit of background, I used to date this girl named Ashley, and we dated for about 6 months. I know that's not a very long time, but when we got together, we moved pretty fast. Things went from 0 to 60 in no time between us, and I was all in. She was funny, smart, and seemed to get me. And then about a month or two in, she went from 60 to 120, and it caused major issues. She got super jealous of everything I did. She tried to tell me that I couldn't talk to my female coworkers, which included my boss. And she even got mad at me for talking to my mom because, quote, she should be the only woman in my life. There were a few other things, but these were the reddest of flags. So, after a bit, I ended up breaking things off. She didn't take it well, at all. And she kept texting me for weeks, but I thought eventually she would just move on. They eventually slowed from 100 a day to a few a week, and I figured that a gradual decline was better than non-stop. The first awkward/weird thing that happened after we broke up was about 2 months after we split. I was in a store needing to pick some stuff up for home, just random things. I turned down one of the aisles, and of course, there she was, staring at the shelves and lost in thought. My heart skipped a beat. We hadn't spoken in 2 months, and part of me wanted to walk to the other corner of the store to try to avoid her, but then I thought that that would be rude. So, I took a breath and walked down the aisle and decided to say hi to her. Just a simple, "Oh, hey, Ashley." Like a nonchalant and quick comment about us being in the same store. She looked up and seemed genuinely surprised to see me, saying, "Oh, hey, it's been a while." And there were some awkward niceties between us, just comments about how we looked, how things were going, until I decided that I should excuse myself and finish my shopping. We said goodbye, and that was the end of it. When I started walking towards the checkout lane, I noticed that there was a guy standing at the end, just kind of watching me. I was in self-checkout, so I just assumed this guy took his job of watching the people ringing themselves up very seriously. I finished ringing up my stuff, paid, and as I was walking away from the register, the man stepped in front of me, causing me to pause and look at him. He stared at me aggressively and said, "Sir, can you please come with me?" That was when I noticed that his name tag said General Manager, and I was even more confused. What would the GM of the store want with me? I asked him what was going on, and he very sternly just said, "Please, just come with me." I did, because why wouldn't I? We got to a small section near where the offices were, and the man finally turned and said, "Someone in the store reported that you were shoplifting. They said that they saw you shove something into your pockets and into your pants." I was completely taken aback, and I told him that I hadn't taken anything. They asked if they could search my bags and if I would be willing to empty my pockets, to which I completely agreed. I know that I probably could have denied it, said that my rights were being violated, but in the end, I was more appalled that I was being accused, and felt the need to prove myself innocent. I handed them all my stuff, turned my pockets inside out, shook the legs of my pants, all in an effort to show that they were wrong. After they were satisfied that I hadn't taken anything, they let me go with nothing more than a mumbled apology, which I will say was inadequate considering. As I left the store, I saw Ashley standing outside by her car watching me exit with this evil-looking little smile on her face. And that's when it clicked. She was the person that reported me. I was certain of that, but why? To mess with me? In the end, I blew it off, thinking that she must be incredibly miserable to be willing to do something so petty to get back at me for breaking up with her. Then came the next step in her pettiness: the posters. I was walking to my car from my apartment about a week after the whole store thing, when I saw a poster of some sort stapled to an electrical pole outside of my building. It looked like a missing poster. But then, when I looked at it again, I realized the picture on the poster was of me. And it didn't say missing. It said, "Warning, this man is a cheater and a thief, do not trust him." It went on to detail a bunch of random lies about me, saying I was abusive, that I stole money from her, and a bunch of other crazy accusations. I tore the poster down and was furious, but then realized that the person that had put it up was probably Ashley. As I drove to work, I saw more of the posters stapled to random light poles along the route. And as much as I wanted to stop and tear them all down, I didn't have time. I had to just accept that they were there and hope that the next rainstorm would take care of them. I considered calling the cops, but then I thought, what the hell would I tell them? My ex is putting up mean posters about me all around town? It sounded ridiculous, and I had zero proof that it was her. That was the worst part, that I could not prove that it was Ashley. I tried to message her on Facebook, but she had to have blocked me because I couldn't find her account. I tried to text her and call her, but none of it would go through, which tells me she had my number blocked. I was livid, but I had to move on, mostly for my own sanity. The final straw was about 3 days after the posters. I had gotten home from work late and decided to just zone out and watch TV for a few hours. After around 11, I decided to call it a night, but as I walked into my bedroom, something felt off. I felt this really strange need to check everything. Like something was out of place, but I didn't know what. I checked my windows to make sure they were locked. They were. I walked back and checked the front door, and it was locked too. Then I got back to my bedroom, and for some reason, I felt like I needed to check my closet. I have a decent-sized walk-in closet in the back corner of my room. I opened the door, and there, standing amidst my clothes, was Ashley. She was just standing there with a big grin on her face like she pulled the best prank in the world. My heart was in my throat, and I asked her what the hell she was doing. She just tilted her head and chuckled and said, "Oh, hi, And then before I could say anything, she bolted past me and ran out of my apartment. I stood there dumbfounded for way too long before realizing I should call the cops. I did end up calling them, but by the time they showed up, she was long gone. I also had to call the office to have them change and check the locks, because she got into my apartment somehow, and I have no idea how still to this day. What's crazy is that I never saw her again after this. I haven't heard from her, seen her at the store, seen her around town, nothing. It's like whatever she planned got foiled, and she had to disappear, but then that begs the question, what was she planning? Was she waiting for me to fall asleep so that she could do God knows whatever it was she was going to do? Was my life in danger? I have no idea. But thankfully she's gone from my life, at least for now. So that's my crazy ex story, and it's taken me a long time to get back to feeling normal and less paranoid about Ashley. But I'm certainly a lot more cautious about who I let into my life nowadays. Hello, Raven. I would like to share my scary dating experience from the past decade. I had been in a relationship and married for 22 years. As newly single for the first time in my adulthood, the dating scene surely had changed. It was time to download Tinder and start swiping. Anyone who has gone through a breakup or divorce knows how strange it is to start over all of a sudden. I had just moved to a small studio flat and I knew none of my neighbors. I went out quite often, most likely to ease the loneliness. One night, I was in a bar with my friends. They had never used online dating apps, so I decided to show how easy it is, especially for a female, to hook up. I went on Tinder, swiped, matched, exchanged a couple of messages, invited the match to meet up at the bar. He messaged, 20 minutes, and I'll be there. He was driving, so he declined to get into the bar for pints. I wasn't smashed, just a couple of drinks in. My friends stared at me in disbelief as I said my goodbyes and left. I met the date right in front of the bar, noted he was in fact sober, around my age, and fit. We exchanged compliments. He seemed alright, and we head off to my place, like two adults hooking up would do. Little did I know what was about to transpire. After a while, getting in the mood, dancing cheek to cheek, and taking our clothes off, this adult male started to argue that he does not believe in safe practices in adult activities. For me, keeping my health priority, I argued he should leave. I was, of course, a bit scared of the sudden turn in the situation, but he was not acting aggressive towards me, just stating that he would not leave until he has had me all naturally. I noticed that he seemed, all of a sudden, very drunk. His speech was turning incoherent. He was sober when we met, and we did not have any drinks at my place or as he was driving. I thought, oh my gosh, has he taken some kind of illegal substance? Him being high on something and me telling him to leave, he was about to exit the door in his birthday suit. What should I do? If I can't get him out, fully dressed, should I just leave the guy alone? Let him pass out and sleep over at my place until he was in his right mind again? I could call my closest friend and ask for a place to stay for the night. My mind was racing. But then I overcame my distress and decided that, at this point, it most likely would be better to just call the police. He wasn't fit to drive home anyways. The strange nude man seemed to act even stranger, not speaking anymore, just staring into oblivion and mumbling. I decided it's best if I make the call to police from outside. I told him to wait indoors, that I had to take the trash out, and then I called the local 911 operator. I told them I needed the police to take my trashy date out of my apartment. 2 policemen arrived in under 15 minutes. I explained the situation, and they asked me to wait downstairs, outdoors. It was chilly in October already after midnight. I heard the police going in, exchanging words, and then one of them came back out. We need an ambulance. Wait here, the policeman said. I started to get freaked out. What possibly could have happened in 15 minutes while I had been outside? The ambulance came, they run upstairs, and very shortly I started hearing a loud groaning and moaning. My date crying like an animal. I heard one nosy neighbor open their door and ask the paramedics what's going on. It's all under control, I heard the paramedic answer. After what felt like an eternity, one of the policemen came down and gave me a status report. Okay, so he had dangerously low blood sugar, hypoglycemia, as they say, and he had gone into insulin shock, but the paramedics have now resuscitated him successfully. He did hit his head, and there is a pool of blood on your floor. I was speechless. However, I managed to ask what I should tell the neighbors about the awful noise in the middle of the night. Just tell him it was a medical emergency and that you saved his life. I had no idea. He had not told me that he had any health issues. I had never before seen someone go into insulin shock like that. As the paramedics were done, they walked him out of my building. He just waved goodbye and was again a bright and regular person. I climbed back up and started cleaning the blood off of my floor. I had some time to reflect on what had just happened. If I had left my apartment and left him staying there sleeping it off, as I initially considered, he would have died overnight. Some may be hoping that I never used Tinder again, but nah, I did. Just more responsibly. That is actually how I later found my now husband. And thank you to anyone listening. I hope that you found my story at least somewhat educational. So, this story that I'm telling you just happened. I just came back from vacation, and it is my first day back. I'm an EVS/housekeeper, and my unit that I work in is the Neuro ICU housekeeping. I clean the rooms when patients are occupying them or when they leave, and sometimes the OR rooms where they're doing surgeries. But anyway, I've always been sensitive to the paranormal, and I always attract the weirdos. I'm not sure why, but I never have a dull moment because something is always happening. But yesterday I just came back from vacation, and it's my first day back, and I was kind of excited as I missed working. I get to my first room. The patient is in the room, so all I have to do is take the trash out and make sure they have soap, toilet paper, etc. I mop the floors every day and wipe down the rails of the beds. I walk in and I see an old, frail lady with a tube down her throat and wrist restraints. Some patients need them because they get violent, or they are a hazard to themselves while doped out on painkillers. I softly knock and introduce myself. "Housekeeping, my name is Whitney. I'm going to tidy up your room for you today." Even though she was in a coma, I still like to introduce myself because they can still hear you. I finished cleaning and stocking up her rooms, so I started mopping. I got close to her bed to mop under her bed, and she pulled her hand out of the restraint and tried to grab me. It scared me so bad that I jumped. Her monitors started to beep really fast, and I started to hear a really low, deep gargling or growl coming from this lady. The nurses came in to check her out to make sure she was okay, strapped her hand back down and left while I finished up fast and went on with my business to the other rooms. During my shifts, when I would walk past her room, I could feel this eeriness, and I felt super unsettled, and you could hear the low gargling. Sometimes people who are connected to tubes will make weird noises, but this one just felt different. The next day, which is the day that I'm writing this, the same day, something really unsettling happened. I'm hiding in my janitor's closet trying to settle myself down as I just really want to go home. But I walked to her room with my janitor cart and I stood there for a bit trying to get enough courage to go in, but something is telling me to stop. But I can get a write-up if I don't clean every room on my list. I took a deep breath and walked in, said housekeeping, and started taking her trash out, keeping my eyes low and not looking at her face. But I can see that she's still in restraints and still in a coma with a tube in her throat. Where her main trash can is, I have to turn my back towards her because it's right against her main door, but since it's the ICU doors, they're all glass. So I was replacing the bag when I looked up and saw my reflection. She was standing right behind me. I jumped, turning around, screaming. She had somehow pulled the tube out of her throat without gagging, making any noise, and/or setting off the monitors that are hooked up to her. She pulled out the IV and somehow got out of her restraints. I ran out of the room to the nurse's station, and this patient freaking followed me out of her room and was whispering my name. I cannot get her voice out of my head. It was super low and raspy. It sounded like something that would come out of a demon in a scary movie, not this tiny old lady. The nurses that were at the station jumped up, grabbing her and asking her questions while ushering her back to her room. We're all stumped how she did this, as it just doesn't make sense. Some of the nurses blamed me for helping her out, but at the same time, I was only in there for not even 5 minutes, and plus they could see me through the glass doors. I went to lunch, unable to eat, of course. When I came back, she was gone. The old lady was gone. I asked where the patient in 301 went, and their eyes widened, and we started searching for her before calling security. We looked in all the patient rooms, bathrooms, utility rooms, in the units, when I had a feeling to look in my janitor's closet. The only way to open this door is to have a key, which only the housekeepers have, and this door is kind of broken. So when you open it, it's super loud and makes a loud banging noise. I opened my janitor closet, and there she was, using the mop sink. I yelled for the nurses. We ended up cleaning my mop sink and she was sent to a different unit. I'm not sure which, and I wasn't going to really ask, but no one knows how this old lady opened the door without a key, and how she opened it without making the banging noise. The door is super heavy. I'm 5'10" and 150 pounds, and I struggled to push this door open. So, how did this tiny 5-foot woman open this door? Anyway, I'm just rambling on. Thank you for telling my story, and remember that you matter and you are important. And just be cautious in your workplace and at home. There are both good and crazy people out there. Hey Raven. While I have a few stories of my own that I plan on submitting, this one is about my son. We will call him R. It happened about 6 months ago when he was 6. He came out of his room one morning and let out a big sigh. He told my husband and I that he hadn't been sleeping well, and our conversation went something like this. Me. I'm sorry to hear that, bud. Do you know why? Thinking it might be bad dreams, growing pains, etc. Him. A guy is in my room at night. My heart drops. I try to stay calm. I look at my husband and we're in a silent agreement to not escalate the situation. We often say R is in his own world. He's full of imagination and wonder. My husband. A guy? Like you keep dreaming about someone coming in your room? R. No, he's really in there, but maybe he's not a guy. I don't know. He has the shape of a human, but he's all misty black. Me. What does he do? R. Well, I wake up and look at the edge of my bed and he rises up from there. Me. Does he say anything? Do you try to talk to him? Him. No, he doesn't say anything. I don't either because the longer I stare at him, the taller he gets. He goes up to the ceiling over me. I just close my eyes and go back to sleep eventually. I don't want to walk past him to come and get you. Me. How long has he been coming in your room? R. At least 3 nights now. That's why I'm so tired. Me. Does he make you feel scared? R. Not really, but I don't feel safe either. He has a knife in his hand. I feel like he wants to scare me but won't actually hurt me. At this point, I get up and grab all of my cleansing tools and begin to clear his room. I'm a practicing witch and energy healer. My husband asks R to draw him. My son then draws what I can only describe as a shadow person. The only distinct feature is its orange eyes, which he said kind of glow. He came in the room as I was clearing it and said, I'm gonna kind of miss him. I think he was used to people being scared of him and was just lonely. I told him while that might be the case, he was keeping R from getting good sleep and there's no reason that any spirit or human should try to be scaring a child. I tried to keep it as light as to not instill any fear that might attract more spirits or make him feel any more uneasy. I was confident in my ability to clear the room and protect it. Ever since I did, my son hasn't seen him again. I refresh it every so often and spray Florida water in there every night before bed. R cut out the drawing of the figure and carried it around a while. He named it 99. Eventually, he used it as inspiration to create an entire story about characters with number names. 99, 88, 66, etc. This was eye-opening for me, and now I make sure he knows how to protect his energy, and I keep the house cleansed regularly. He's drawn to spooky things, so I'm glad this lesson came up while he was young, as I'm sure this won't be the last of his encounters. While I don't count myself among the religious, I do feel a sense of spirituality about me. This was confirmed many years ago, just days after my father's sudden passing. It was mid-December of 1992. and I was fortunate to have my entire family with me to see a Christmas play at a local theater. It was then back to my house for a meal of homemade chili and tamales, my dad's favorite dish. This was the first time we were all together since Thanksgiving, and I was so pleased that they all enjoyed my dinner, especially my dad. My dad was a quiet man and did not engage in conversation, but my relationship with him was good, albeit without much communication. We said our goodbyes for the evening, and I felt pleased for planning a nice get-together. The next day I was giving a final, I'm a college professor, when I was interrupted by one of our campus security officers who gave me a note that simply read "emergency" with an unknown phone number. I rushed back to my office, got my office mate to proctor the rest of the exam, and called the number. To my surprise, my brother answered the phone. He was in the waiting room at the local hospital. I asked him what was up, and his simple reply was, "Dad is dead." I was in shock. We had just been together the night before. Dad looked so healthy without any indication that he might have had a health issue. In a daze, I went back to my classroom and in a very calm voice asked my colleague if she could stay until the students were finished, that my dad had just died and that I needed to be with my family. She was more emotional than I was, as she embraced me. I believe it was shock that kept me calm. On the ride over to my sister's home, the entire realization of my father's passing caught up with me and I could barely contain myself. It was difficult to maintain my driving, but I was in a complete emotional meltdown. I've never cried so deeply before and have never since. Now, this is where the story gets interesting. It was my brother who opened the door to my sister's home, and without warning, grabbed me, looked me directly in the eye and said, "You knew. You knew." He was referring to the evening that I had planned the night before. Not really processing what he meant and still reeling from my dad's sudden death, I just kept repeating, No, I had no idea this would happen." We all sat motionless and almost silent for what seemed like an eternity, all in disbelief, all in shared grief, until we said our goodbyes and parted ways. When I went to my car, it was early morning and dark. As I opened the door, I noticed a small, shiny object. Looking down, I saw a dime on the asphalt, next to the open door. I hadn't noticed it before. It didn't fall from my pocket or escape from my car, but there it was. I picked it up with a sense of disbelief and hope. You see, I grew up in a working-class household. My dad never finished high school, and my mom for the most part stayed home to raise us 3 kids. For as long as I can remember, my dad had a second job and would work at menial tasks, usually relegated for high school kids. But he never complained or thought anything was beneath him. When I was a teen and my social life was expanding, he would always say to me as I was exiting the house for a party or football game, "Hey, do you have a dime?" My response was always, "Of course I do, Dad." Money was tight, and he could never offer me anything more than that, but he knew that having a dime meant that he was just a phone call away. This year will mark the 32nd anniversary of my dad's passing, and I think of him often. I now have 2 grown children of my own, and through hard work and a work ethic that my dad gave me, I'm able to provide for my family. And while I can give them more than 10 cents, it's still that simple dime that has made me wealthy beyond belief. I've always loved writing. Fiction primarily, but I also really enjoyed the research side of things and writing the papers for it. I'm pretty amateur, and can admit that, but I'm always looking for ways to improve. While picking my elective classes in my junior year of high school, one of the choices we had included a creative writing class. I immediately knew that I would be choosing that class. and even my previously favorite elective, which was French, was going to be overshadowed by all its glory. But I was excited. I wanted to improve my writing and even learn more techniques. But while I enjoy using my words to create a place people could get lost in, others use theirs to cause harm, fear even, and not the kind that we enjoy. Not the kind that we're all here for. Our class had more people in it than I expected, and definitely some people were there that I was surprised by. The bigger question was, were they there because they truly wanted to take the class, or because they thought it was going to be an easy one to pass? Either way, I wasn't going to let them distract me from what I wanted out of the curriculum. The teacher was the senior English literature teacher, Ms. Clark, so while I hadn't had her as a teacher yet, I was at least familiar with her, which was nice. I would get to experience her style of teaching a year earlier. I quickly learned that Ms. Clark was definitely the teacher for this class, and for anything English and writing. She was very much a Miss Frizzle, but for literature type. She was eccentric, colorful, and very kind. It seemed that she would do anything in class to get the kids motivated and in the right mood, even if it meant making a fool of herself. She stood on a desk before, tapping a rhythm to a poem as she recited it from memory. She was a lot of fun. The class was for the whole year, not just a semester, which was nice too. The goal for the end of the year was to write a short story with a minimum of so many words. Of course, once I learned that, I thought surely this must truly be a group of people that were passionate about writing, because that would be no easy feat, right? Throughout the year, we looked at different topics on how to write a story. I promise this is all related. Some of the sections we talked about were our main plot, ideas, characters, settings, how to show more than tell, and so forth. In the second quarter, one of the topics we worked on were character qualities, strengths and weaknesses, fears, accomplishments, etc. She wanted us to focus on building a dynamic character that was different from our average Daily Joe that we might see. And her way of doing that was to hone in on our fears. Of course, we didn't quite know the full take on this at the time. It started as her explaining how we were going to use a single page and write down all of those qualities. We could be as descriptive as we wanted, and we could write it however we wanted. In lines, number them, with pictures, it didn't matter, as long as we thoroughly explained them. The only stipulation, really, was that we had to be able to separate each thought, in the form of being able to cut each of them out. Simple enough. I made my list and thought it was pretty extensive, expecting that we would use these for character development too. We had to do a similar assignment where we wrote down secrets, dreams, and goals. I thought that I saw where this was all going, and I was liking the idea. So, after us writing all of our ideas and cutting them out, Miss Clark came by with a wide and dark-colored basket and told us that we would be putting all of our ideas in the container. Now, of course, this seemed kind of terrifying at first, given what was written on those papers. But we were all instructed to use pencils, and no names were to be written on them anywhere. It was supposed to be completely anonymous. I thought the names weren't provided because we would just be keeping the list to ourselves. I was not expecting that. She explained how our fears and vulnerabilities can be used to make more convincing characters. She was going to read them out loud in front of the class and then pinning them to the sideboard so we could go back to them. The purpose was to give us more conflict options about our characters. We weren't expecting this to bleed into our actual lives. Some that she read were tame, like stresses of passing classes, sadness about a relative passing too soon, or losing weight. But then there were some heavier ones that definitely made the classroom feel different. Someone confessed an eating disorder that they feared would eventually kill them. Someone mentioned drug use, possibly being pregnant, and the mood of the class slowly shifted. We all started looking around to see if we could catch someone's reaction to the confessions. Everyone except Miss Clark. She would continue with a poker face reading off the slips. Occasionally, she would look over her glasses at the class, but still gave no reaction. She paused when one of them made us chuckle a bit, and she basically scolded us. She reminded us that these were very real. These were very important topics for us, and we were to take them seriously. She wasn't one to get too serious, so when she did, we all pretty much straightened up. But then she trailed off reading one. We knew something was wrong. As mentioned, she collected these from us the day that she read them, so she didn't get a chance to go through them before. I fear that one day I will not be able to handle it anymore, and I'll steal my dad's handgun, bring it to school, and... Miss Clark stopped reading it, clearly. But it was already out there enough for us to fill in the rest. She quickly looked up and scanned over the room, her face completely pale. She held it up and asked, "Who wrote this?" No one responded. We all looked around hoping someone would confess. I hoped they would stand up and say it was a lie or they were just messing around, but no one did. Miss Clark stood up and gave a small speech. Her voice was almost shaky. She explained how she understood this was a very personal assignment, but that this was more than that. She explained how she appreciated the honesty and true emotions that we chose to share in these, but said this one needed more attention, to be more than a topic for a fictional story. She continued to look us all over slowly, studying our faces, asking one of us to come forward. She even pleaded. If we didn't feel comfortable now, she asked us to approach her after class so they could talk about it more. We sat in silence as she waited for a few minutes, but God, it felt like hours. The room was tense. Some of us were holding back tears. It was insane. I remember sitting there really trying to figure out how much we knew each other. I had a few friends taking the class. 2 of them were in the same hour as myself. My other friends had her in a different hour. However, my class was the first creative writing class that she taught for the day, so I would have to be the one to tell, or rather warn my friends that this was going to happen. So I had a few friends in this class, I was acquainted with others, and there were some others sprinkled in that I hardly knew or rarely talked to. I remember looking them all over thinking, if that were true, that confession, who would be capable of something like that? Or who's been having enough issues at school that they would do that? And their plans were obviously more than just self-harm, right? Since they wanted to bring it to school. I had to keep myself calm to not cause anxiety, but that was a hard day. It only seemed to get harder from there. I remember people forming their normal cliques in the halls. Anyone they saw, such as myself, that weren't a part of it, they watched you intently. There was whispering or gossiping, rather. People either kept to themselves or those they knew more, while some tried to make friends and force that connection harder. The rumors spread really fast. It was like they were all trying to figure out who wrote it, or maybe just be on everyone's good side. I don't know which one was better. But then there were other fears and confessions that were shared that day that caused panic and isolation from others. Some people accused others of being the owner of the confessions. The rumors spread about a few girls in that class being pregnant. I was even made fun of because they thought that I had an eating disorder. It was harsh and difficult to see us all crumbling because of one assignment. There were letters sent out to parents about a possible threat, and everyone in my class was required to speak to a counselor. The talks with my parents were just as painful. Overall, the weeks following that class were pretty draining, but the even bigger concern was that no one ever figured out who wrote it. Or, at least if anyone did, they were keeping it very quiet. I would like to think that maybe they could have looked at the handwriting and compared it to other work done in the class, but a lot of our work was typed. But maybe they were able to, and they were able to just resolve it. I know that no one was suspended, and no one seemed to be absent from the class, but the effect definitely lingered in the class. Even Miss Clark seemed different. She did her best to elevate the mood and try to stay in a positive light, but The damage was already done. Miss Clark wasn't there for my senior year either, and there was no announcement of her leaving, so I wonder if she was actually fired after that year. The class still remained as an elective, but I heard it wasn't nearly as exciting as it once was. All I know is that I learned a lot more in that class than just writing styles, and it left a lasting effect on me. And to my fellow classmates, if those feelings were true, I hope that you got the help that you needed. I live in a small city on the East Coast in a one-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend and our cat, Vader. The story takes place on a weekend that my girlfriend was out of town visiting her family. I'm in my mid-30s now, so I'm not the partier that I was in my 20s. My idea of a good solo weekend nowadays includes working on my music and watching cheesy action movies with my cat. The layout of my apartment is important to understand the following events that took place. My living room couch faces the TV. Directly to the right of the TV is the door to our bedroom, which swings inwards towards the room and away from the couch. If you're watching TV and the bedroom door is open, then the bedroom is in your peripheral vision. With that being said, one night I was watching a movie with the lights dimmed, the bedroom light off and its door half open. All of a sudden, I noticed a rounded head-size outline that appeared to be sticking out from behind the door at about eye level. I stared at this strange shape for a minute or so, trying to figure out what it could be. I was puzzled by the silhouette, but it was a dark shape in a darker room, so the profile is all that I saw. Though it seemed odd, initially I thought it might be part of the laundry bag that hangs off the inside of the door. I thought maybe the bag had broke or had partially fallen off the top of the door that held it up. But it was the wrong shape and height to be any part of the laundry bag. Then I thought maybe it was my black cat doing some new weird door-hanging trick, but he was fast asleep in his bed. I was trying to figure out what this mysterious thing was, and as I was looking directly at it, the figure abruptly ducked out of sight. It had moved right in front of my eyes. Realizing that it was not the silhouette of some inanimate object, I immediately assumed that someone had broken into my apartment and was hiding in my bedroom, watching me. Being absolutely horrified, I jumped up, ran to my bathroom, and locked the door. The shape had no features, so if it was a person, they must have been wearing some kind of black mask or something. I stood in the bathroom for 10 minutes repeating, "What the hell was that?" over and over to myself. I would have called 911 to report a break-in, but my phone was on the coffee table right in front of where I saw the figure. After forcing myself to calm down a bit, doing some breathing exercises, I mustered the courage to grab the biggest knives that I could find in my kitchen and confront the intruder. I had not heard any movement in the apartment, so I knew nothing had left. Butcher's knives in one hand and a serrated bread knife in the other, I approached the bedroom door, yelling, "I saw you in there and the cops are on the way. I have 2 big knives, and if you come out now, I'll let you leave without violence." No response. The light switch for the bedroom is outside the room, behind the TV, so I turned the bedroom light on and barged in screaming like a lunatic, wielding kitchen knives. My plan was to scare the intruder by acting crazy. Alas, the room was empty. It's a small room with nowhere to hide, with one small window, 3 stories above the street, with no ledge to climb out on. In addition, there was an air conditioner in the window that was very difficult to move and impossible to put back onto place from the outside. The only door leading out of our apartment is right next to the bathroom where I initially took shelter, and I was positive that nothing had gone by or opened that door. The apartment is old and creaky, so it's impossible to cross the hall or open the door silently. Upon realizing that it could not have been a person, my fear and adrenaline kicked back in. Again, I started repeating, "What the hell was that? What the hell was that?" I had heard stories about what some referred to as shadow people, and based on those descriptions and what I saw, that was the closest I could come to an answer. Eventually, I decided that, unless I came to peace with the creature, there was no way I could sleep in that apartment. I'd been living there for 10 years, and I had never seen anything out of the ordinary before. I reasoned that if in 10 years the worst thing that it had done to me was to let me catch a glimpse of it, it probably wasn't malevolent. I began talking out loud to the shadow creature and tried to bargain with it, asking it to keep to itself, and I'll try to do the same. I believe that I stated that we could live in harmony, and since that night, I have not seen anything strange in my apartment, and I hope to never see it again. I have 3 crazy ex-girlfriend stories. One was a coworker, and she was bipolar, and that was not the problem. It was that she would go off her meds from time to time. One time, out of the blue, she walked up to me and punched me in my arm. Thanks to the thick material of the jacket we wore, it only left a slight bruise, but it did hurt. The other time she was off her meds again, but this time she bit me in my arm. Not a playful bite, either. She walked up and stood next to me. She was there for a few minutes, I think, when she leaned forward a little. I thought she was looking at the meat cooler when she turned her head and sunk her teeth into my arm. I swear if not for that jacket, she would have left a mark. That, too, really hurt. She didn't work there long after that. The second one is short, as I don't remember much about her, except that I thought she was nice at first. Other than being rude, she wasn't violent that I saw. I broke up with her and found out from my sister-in-law that she was a stalker, and would stand at the curb by our driveway and just stare at the house in the middle of the night. She only did this a few times and stopped. I don't know if they scared her off or what. The third one happened in 86 to 87. My mom had people come in to help clean her house. One was a nice lady, and we would talk when she cleaned. We got along fine. At least, I thought. We dated for about 6 months. It was then that I started seeing what others already saw in her, but didn't know how to tell me that I would believe. I was in love with her. She was my 3rd girlfriend. I guess that was why I didn't see what she did was so wrong. We never cuddled on the couch, never kissed. We took a shower together, but she wouldn't even let me wash her back. In 87, I went close to Los Angeles from Oceanside to learn to drive semis. She had a job in LA in a bar. I was talking to her on the phone, and she told me that she quit the job as she knew that I wouldn't want her to drive to LA. I asked if she had another job, and she said no, and that I could take care of her. That one was the kicker. So I did. To the curb. Then I found out she had no respect for others' property. The youngest son of my mom's boyfriend was living with us, and he told her to not go into his room. She did, and she threw away things that he wanted to keep. One time we went over to her friend's house and she let the cat outside. I found out her friend had already told her to not let her cat out of the house. I got a $5 gift and a birthday card, and she got mad that I didn't give it to her. My mom told me after we broke up. Mom also fired her. It was more that she looked like she was cleaning the house than doing actual cleaning. Then, for several months, she would keep coming around to the house, demanding that I should take her back, saying, "What about my feelings?" That she needed me and I needed her. I mean, we're talking like 4 months or more. I kept telling her that I don't know about your feelings, but that this is how I feel. Then, I finally told her, I don't care about your feelings. We're through. You don't respect yourself or others. Now I see that you never loved me at all." She finally stopped coming by, and in December of '89 I left California for good and never saw her again. There was a kid named Johnny that lived down the road from where I grew up, in the woods of Mid-Coast, Maine. Johnny was a grade older than me, but he was friends with my older sister, so he always treated me with respect. Although he loved my sister, he hated my older brother, and was at least neutral if not positive towards me. I even walked over to his house a handful of times in my early teens to smoke and play video games despite not knowing him all that well. His mom was nice and offered me snacks, but his dad seemed like a real hard-ass, barking criticisms of his son's lifestyle and general habits. One thing I did know about Johnny is that he was severely bipolar. However, he was correctly medicated, and it seemed like he had a pretty good grip on the disorder. The reason that Johnny and my sister knew each other was because he was dating one of my sister's best friends, who I'll refer to as M. Johnny and M had been dating for several years, but they were going through a rough patch, and eventually his intensity and possessive tendencies grew too much for her to handle. Despite Johnny's pleas and bargains for change, M left him. Johnny made numerous attempts to win M back over the next few weeks, claiming that they were meant to be together and that he loved her. But alas, she moved on with her life and started dating other people. I went to a party at M's house after they broke up, and she seemed like she was living her best life. In stark contrast, 1 week after the party, M was dead. The news reports claimed teenage girl found dead in home with no other details. The first reports speculated as to whether M might have fallen from her third-story balcony, as it was initially alleged to be a freak accident involving alcohol and gravity. Over the next few days, my sister and her peers heartbrokenly mourned the death of their friend. Among the most afflicted by the news of M's death was Johnny, uncontrollably sobbing in between long bouts of outraged swearing, culled by silent contemplation. It was apparent just how much Johnny loved M, my sister told me. My sister held Johnny as he wept, and vice versa. 2 days after the informal friend wake, Johnny's face appeared on the news. The headlines read, "Local Double Murder." It turns out that M's death was no accident. Police on the scene instantly clocked it as a horrific and gruesome murder scene where she had been mutilated with a large knife. The cops kept that information close to their vests while the investigation was pending, so as to not spark the culprit to react in fight or flight. During this multi-day silent investigation, Johnny's dad stopped showing up to work. When responsible parties came calling as to the whereabouts of Johnny's dad, his mother said he never came home after work a couple of nights prior. He probably finally took off for good like he always threatened, she explained away. It wasn't long before the police showed up at Johnny's door, pinning him as the main suspect in M's murder. What the police didn't expect to find was Johnny's father's body in the basement, slashed to shreds by a large knife. Turns out that after M broke up with Johnny, he stopped taking his meds and spiraled into a jealous rage that boiled for weeks, until he finally drove to her house in the middle of the night, stabbed her dead, threw her body off the balcony, and then proceeded to mutilate the body for a great deal of time. After killing M, Johnny drove home and loudly entered his house covered in blood with the knife tucked into his belt. He was evidently confronted by his awoken father in a blind fury. Johnny used the knife to end his father's criticisms once and for all. The mother came downstairs to find her husband dead at the hands of her blood-soaked son, and, in a panic, came up with a plan to help Johnny hide the man's body in the basement. Johnny was an only child that suffered from severe mental illness from a young age. which I believe is why his mother decided to become complicit in the hellish act, instead of immediately calling the authorities like she should have. Johnny was brought to trial on double murder charges, and he pled guilty. He received life in prison without the possibility of parole, given the brutal nature of the crimes. My sister was asked to voluntarily testify against Johnny, but declined out of fear. The day after Johnny had killed M and his dad with the same knife, he had kissed my sister on her cheek and cried in her arms. My sister will never fully overcome the fact that she could have so easily been victim number 3. You see, Johnny always had a crush on my sister, but she never reciprocated due to loyalty of her friend, M. So, for him to turn that evil jealous rage towards my sister would not have been a stretch. Luckily for my family, it did not turn out that way. I mentioned earlier that Johnny hated my older brother. One time at a party, Johnny ran up to me yelling, "Where's your brother? I'm gonna slit his effing throat." I told him that I didn't know where my brother was and brushed it off as drunken BS. But, in retrospect, I think Johnny was serious. Johnny is still in prison today with no hopes of release. I do still have friends that write happy birthday cards to Johnny once a year, but my sister is not one of those friends. Hey Raven, this is my second story that I'm sharing. This is a few stories about a single entity, so to begin, this is part my story, part my aunt's, and part my cousin's. So, in the summers, my sister and I would spend a month or so at my aunt's house in West Virginia. It was an old house, had an old creepy barn and a little building that my aunt used for her grooming room. So these all happened between my ages of 10 to 15. The house's previous owner was a woman named Dice Boggs. Story had it that she'd passed in the small building that my aunt used, which was upstairs, where apparently her bed was moved to near the end of her life. The crazy thing was, Dice had the same last name as my aunt and uncle, but they didn't know her. So, from my own experience, it was nighttime, and we were just hanging out in a dining room, my sister and I, and we suddenly heard an old record player start up with gospel music. My aunt didn't have a record player, so my sister and I ran to my aunt, and she told us if we looked out at the front porch, we would see the rocking chair swaying back and forth. And she was right. Apparently, Dice liked to turn her old gospel music on and listen to it from the front porch in her rocking chair. No harm, right? My aunt told me about an experience or two that she'd had with her. The first being she had gone up and cleaned her room, moved some things around, and when she went to sit downstairs to relax, she heard what sounded like things being dragged across the floor, like someone was moving things. She went upstairs, and nothing was moved. So, at night, she was trying to sleep, and suddenly she felt like she was being watched. She opened her eyes and sees a woman just floating at the end of her bed. She grabs the blanket, throws it over her head, and screams, "Go away, Dice!" She mustered the courage to peek out her blankets, and much to her comfort, Dice was gone. My cousin told me about his encounter where he was in his room trying to sleep, when he looked at the edge of his bed and Miss Dice was sitting there, looking like she was babbling away with some story, although he couldn't hear anything coming from her mouth. He got annoyed and decided to tell her to "Go away, Dice, I'm trying to sleep," and she'd disappear. While none of those particular experiences seem bad, but almost sweet, there were times that we had scary things happen in that house, such as loud work boots pounding down the stairs in the mornings, things being lifted up and dropped in the kitchen, doors being locked with no one inside, and my sister being grabbed from behind. There were also unexplained deaths to animals on the land, one being in the barn. Thankfully, no one lives there anymore, but summers there were always an interesting and sometimes scary time. I have many more experiences from my life, which I'll save for another time. I'm not sure what to put this under, but I think it would probably relate more to the paranormal, parallel universe, or doppelgangers. About 4 to 6 months ago, I walked into a McDonald's in Augusta, Kansas, and saw a coworker that I had not seen in 2 or 3 years. I asked her how she was, and she told me that she was door dashing. And she told me that she had been door dashing for a few months in Augusta. She told me that she had reached platinum status, which is the higher level, where you get more or better tips. She specifically said that she doesn't mind taking the no-tip orders, and I thought, I don't take people's orders who don't tip. We talked for a few minutes, and I believe she had a McDonald's delivery sack in which a customer's order was placed into. As she was leaving, I told her goodbye and saw her walk out the door. Just a few days back, my coworker, who supposedly was a DoorDasher, sent me a couple of photos from Baltimore, Maryland, and one from Washington, D.C. She sent me a really cool picture of a 500-foot-tall building in Baltimore on Messenger. I asked her how she was doing, and she was doing fine. I told her that I had finally reached platinum status from DoorDashing, and she asked me what that was. I told her, "Don't you DoorDash in Augusta?" And she said that she has never DoorDashed in her life. Perplexed, I asked, "Don't you remember seeing me in McDonald's in Augusta several months back?" And she said that she hasn't been in a McDonald's or been to Augusta in like a year and a half. I was dumbfounded, and I thought that if that wasn't my ex-coworker I spoke to several months ago at the Augusta McDonald's, then who the hell was that? Was it like her doppelganger that works as a DoorDasher in a parallel universe? Or a different timeline? It really blew my mind, and I'm totally weirded out about it. Greetings, Raven. First off, I want to say that I'm a newer listener, but in this short time and countless episodes later, I've become a big fan of what you do, from the content matter to your delivery of user-submitted stories. Thank you. It's comforting to know that I'm not the only one to experience the unknown, and I feel right at home, so thank you for that. And that being said, I would like to share with you just one of the many unexplained experiences from my childhood. This one in particular has haunted me my entire life. This day has always been a clear memory for me, and has always scared the hell out of me since. So, just to give a little context here, when I was a kid, I always had a really bad habit of sitting on the arms of our family's sofas, and it was one of my dad's pet peeves. So, of course, he would always yell at me for doing this. I think the year was either 1995 or 1996. So, on the day in question, I would have been 5 to 6 years old. I didn't have school that day, so I was at home during the daytime and my mom was home too, but being the neat freak she's always been, she was busy cleaning the house. My dad was at work, so I was just kind of bored and wandering around the house when, just as I walked into my living room, who else do I see but my dad? And there he is, just sitting on the arm of the sofa, the exact same way that he always hated. But he had a weird energy about him, and looked slightly different. His eyes were black, and his skin was really pale, much more than his usual complexion. I just remember being completely caught off guard, not only because I was constantly getting in trouble for doing that very thing, but he was supposed to be working still, as it was late morning, early afternoon, and he would work the standard 9 to 5. So, I ask him, why is he sitting like that if it was bad? He doesn't respond. He only stares at me, I followed up by asking him, "Aren't you supposed to be working?" Once again, not a single response, just a creepy, lifeless stare. I start feeling unsettled and run off to go find my mom to let her know that Dad was home. I find her in one of the bedrooms in the back of the house and let her know Dad's home, prompting us to walk out into the living room. But when we walk around the corner, no one is there. He was gone. I assume he just left to go back to work, but later on that evening, after coming home from work at the usual time, as we were talking, I decided to ask him why he came home earlier in the day, followed by why is it okay for him to sit on the end of the couch but I couldn't. A puzzled look comes over his face as he explains to me that he was at work all day and had absolutely no clue what I was even talking about. The thing about my dad is he's always been a straight shooter, a no-nonsense guy, and never one to joke around. So, if that was not my dad that I interacted with, then who or what was it? And furthermore, what in the hell did it want from me? I would hope that perhaps my story may help inspire other people with similar experiences to come forward and share theirs as well. Hey Raven, I've been listening to your podcast for quite some time now, and I decided to share a story that revolved around me, but I didn't go through what happened in this story. Note that this story is going to be from the perspective of my mom, as she is the main person in the story, but will be told by me. This all happened when I was almost 1, but my mom remembers it in full detail. This takes place back in 2008, when my mom was working at a tanning salon. I was very young and didn't have a babysitter at the time, so my mom just took me to work so she could watch over me. My dad was working a different job and doing teacher internships at the time. I was a happy toddler for the most part, and I had blonde hair and blue eyes at this time. Apparently that was rare in 2008, but back to the story. I was always greeted with awes and compliments to me and my mom when she was working. I guess that she was used to it at this point, since I was there a good amount of time. One day when she was working, a lady came in and walked into the salon. My mom said that she had black hair, was a little petite, and that she looked Russian, almost, if that makes sense. Anyway, she goes over to the desk, asks questions and whatnot, and then she notices me. She compliments me and my mom talks to her a little bit before heading out of the salon. Nothing weird at all, my mom thinks. And that's when she shows up the next day and pays more attention to me than the day before. My mom thinks it's suspicious, but shrugs it off as she does ask questions about tanning and whatnot. And this is where it goes from maybe to certain. For the next few days that my mom works, the same woman comes into the salon, pays all of her attention to me, and just leaves. I know what you're probably wondering. Did she get multiple tans done? Did she set up multiple appointments? Did she even set up a single appointment or even get a tan? Unfortunately, I don't have the answers to those questions, but I'll definitely see what my mom can remember in great detail. After a few days, the same woman coming into the store, my mom had two things going on in her head. One, this woman is going to become a regular. And two, this woman is sketchy and paying all of her attention to my son. As you probably guessed, she walks into the salon and pays more attention to me. She then turns to my mom with a questionable look and asks, "Can I take your son out to my car? I want to show my husband how beautiful he is." This confirms my mom's suspicions, and she stood in front of her with a defensive glare. "Hell no, you aren't taking him anywhere. You need to get out of here now." A few more comments are thrown back and forth, and the woman exits the salon furiously. By this point, my mom is shaken to her core and wonders what her intentions were to do with me. After a few days, and my parents finally getting me a babysitter, she learns the true intentions of what the woman had planned. but not in the way she could have imagined. It's morning of the tanning salon she works at, and she's set to open the store that morning. As she arrives, she notices a car pulling up in the parking lot of the tanning salon. My mom thinks that it's no big deal and that it's probably somebody who wants to get a tan done early. As she's unlocking the door to the store, the door of the unknown car opens and out walks the woman who tried to kidnap me. Not only that, but she is pissed off out of her mind and glaring at my mom with sick intentions. My mom bolts in the door, locks it, and hides behind the front counter. She's beyond scared by this point, considering that she has not seen that woman in less than a week in the salon. The woman approaches the door, screaming at my mom and banging on the entrance. "I know you're in there. I know you have him. Let me in." My mom couldn't breathe. This woman was actively trying to get to me and was only entering the salon just to see me. My mom, shaking and crying with fear, fumbles with her phone and calls 911. She explains the situation to the operator the best she can while holding back tears and her fear. All the while, the woman is intensely becoming more and more mad and violent. "I know he's in there. I know you have him. Let me in," were the phrases that she continued to scream at my mom as she was banging on the door violently to enter. She finishes her call with the police and calls her boss to explain what's going on. Struck with fear and nervousness and pain, she lets out all of her emotion on her boss, telling her that she's afraid, that she called the cops, and that her suspicions were correct. Her boss tells her to stay calm and wait for the police, and to not do anything else. As she's on the phone with her boss, she and the woman both hear faint sirens in the distance. The woman runs away to get in her car as the police turn down the street where the salon is located. She drives off, and my mom can see police cars chasing after the woman. This is where it gets crazy. The woman led the police on a chase throughout the Walking Mall parking lot for 5 minutes. During this time, though, the police made sure my mom was safe and stayed with her in the store to protect her, in case the woman tried to harm her, and they also called my father to explain the situation. As the 5 minutes pass, they finally stop her by popping her tires, and they stop the car. The police arrest the woman right then, and the husband as well, who was the driver of the car. A couple of minutes go by, they get arrested, and they give my mom the all clear. At this point, my mom is bulging tears from her eyes, not knowing what to think or what to do in this situation. The police ask her questions, and she gives them statements to what had just happened. That's when she notices the car. She walks towards the car and notices 3 passenger seats in the back of the car. As she looks around, she sees 2 kids next to police officers asking them questions. One was a girl who looked to be 5 or 6 and had blonde hair and blue eyes. The second one was a boy who looked to be no older than 3 and also had blonde hair and blue eyes. She looks back in the car, and she sees 3 car seats, but only 2 children. That's when she realizes the middle one was made for a young toddler. She's hit with a wave of realization and starts bawling her eyes out at the thought, sight, and emotion of what just happened. Her boss and my dad both arrive at the scene to comfort her. A couple minutes go by and she asks one of the officers if she can talk to the woman. They say yes, but only for a few minutes. She walks up to her, tears streaming from her eyes, and a rage of emotion going through her head. I don't know what questions were asked, but one question sticks out so much that my mom can still hear it to this day. "What were you going to do with my son?" my mom asked. No response. "What did you plan on doing with him?" She responds in agony, trying to say sorry in her words. I was going to sell him on the black market." My mom's heart dropped. She couldn't believe what she had done. She let someone who had intentions to sell me for God knows what hold me and give me compliments. She burst into tears and fell on her knees, trying not to believe it. She couldn't believe it. All of her suspicions were true, but times 10. Minutes go by, and I guess that they took the car, took the woman and her husband to the sheriff's office, and closed the store for the entire day. My mom never heard anything about the two children, but she had her suspicions on if they were really the woman's children or not. I'm 17 now, and about to enter my senior year of high school. My mom always has a certain tone when describing this story to me, as this traumatized her tenfold. I still wonder what would have happened if that woman actually got me. I don't like to think about it much, but I just say that I wouldn't live to tell the story. If I had to give any message to future parents out there, I would have 3 things to say. 1. Trust your gut feeling if you feel suspicious about something. 2. Always be mindful of your children, no matter what the cost is. 3. Don't trust everyone you see, as some people could be nice at first, but have ill intentions to you, your family, or even worse, your kids. Thank you for letting me tell this story, as I did my best to recall what my mom told me. I know it may be on the long side, but I assure everyone reading that this is a story to read. To give context, I'm from a small country in South America, and attended a religious school every year. You go to this sort of spiritual getaway in a camp situated in an open field next to a small river, in this sort of forested mountain area. Said place is beautiful, but gives an off vibe. Like it's lost in time due to its very old structures. Because of this, the place has been shrouded in mysteries and horror stories. It doesn't help that the whole town was once burned to the ground in a very gruesome war that almost wiped my country off the map in the 1800s. So, here's what happened. It was my last year in school, our last camp. After a long day of all of my classes, I was tired from hiking in the forest next to the camp. So after dinner and a short stay at a campfire, we were sent to bed. My class was made mostly of women. We were very few men, only 6, including me, so we had the whole dorm hall for all of us. This dorm, which was housing only 6 teens, was a long hall full of bunks made for at least 40 people. Since we didn't have to share, we all chose top bunks next to each other, 3 on my side, including me, and 3 on the row facing me. It was about midnight, and we would just lie there, talking, joking, and laughing in the dark since the lights were out. After a couple of minutes, I fell asleep. I woke up at what I would assume was between 2 to 3 a.m. I rose my head from the sheets to see my best friend in his bunk in front of me, also raising his head. He nods jokingly to the bunk next to him, where another classmate was sleeping. When I turned to see the silhouette of my classmate just standing, staring at his bed. I laugh quietly and nod to my friend as to play a prank on him, and then before we could act, I see the silhouette crouch and notice that my classmate was fully asleep in his bed. Almost at the same time, my friend and I react and look at each other wide-eyed. Both of us cover ourselves in our sheets, doing our best to fall asleep. Somehow we managed to do so. The next morning, I went straight to my friend, and before I could finish asking if he saw it, he interrupted with a "yes," and he told me exactly what he saw. It was the same thing. We approached this classmate and explained it to him. Of course, he thought we were joking. Both me and my friend remember that event to this day, talking about it every now and then, almost 7 to 8 years after it happened. This is a real story. It would have been one thing if I was the only one to see it, but the fact that my friend saw the exact same thing that I did, it gave me the biggest chills. The OP actually sent me a message with a little more context and information that they wanted me to share. So, I'm from Paraguay, a rather small country that was almost destroyed in a war against 3 countries in the late 1800s. known as the bloodiest conflict in South America. By the end of the war, Paraguay was using literal children to fight, since we lost 90% of the male population. There's a reason why I'm telling you this. We have many legends and myths, and one of them is Cassandra, very similar to the Weeping Lady, or La Llorona. She's a woman that forever looks for the bodies of her 2 sons, who were killed in very real battle, which saw the deaths of thousands of kids. She supposedly tends to be crying and calling for the children in places near the water, and by night, she'll appear in the rooms of kids trying to take them with her. It's a very popular camp horror story, but the parallels are notable for what happened. Contrary to the girls' dorm room, which was located in a building near the entrance from the campsite, our dorm was way further, very close to this small river and forest, to the point that you could hear the water flow. Also, the way the whole thing unfolded in retrospect was almost a textbook copy of the tale. This figure behaved similar to the story. When we thought it was still our friend getting ready to climb back into his bunk, we noticed that it would just stay still in front of the bed, almost as if it knew we were watching. It crouched slowly as my actual friend turned around in his bed fully asleep. To answer the question of could it be somebody else, I had clear visual of every classmate, including the one that was awake with me. Everyone was in bed. Could it have been a teacher? Well, no teacher or groundskeeper was staying with us. Whatever that thing was, it was not one of us. I just spoke with my friend who witnessed everything, and he also remembers it in full detail. I asked him if he saw what the figure looked like since his bunk was next to it, and he said that at first the silhouette kind of looked like our classmate, but something about it was off. He said that before crouching, it turned, and he couldn't make out which direction it was staring at. Every time I remember this, my heart sinks. So, today, as I was going for a coffee, I decided to check out a new cafe that had just opened. As I go near the door, I am surprised and happy to see an ex-girlfriend of mine from when I was a kid. We stare at each other for a second, and then I see she mumbles something and she comes towards me. I go in for a hug, and after we greet, she just says, "Do you remember what you've done to me?" I was baffled. We dated many years ago and we never had issues of any kind. No major fights, no abuse, no toxicity. As a matter of fact, she left me because I would not commit, but remained on good terms for a while after, still hanging out, until she found a job abroad and left. At first, I was scared witless, and immediately thought there was something strange. I asked to be more specific, but she wasn't telling. After a little chit-chat, she told me that she was referring to the time me and a friend cleansed her house. It came back to me then. At the time, we were stupid, edgy, semi-goth kids, really into the weird and otherworldly stuff. After she complained about feeling her house was, quote, weird, a friend from our group offered to do some cleansing ritual, which he did while we were basically half drunk. According to her, when 7 years later she talked about this thing with other people, stuff started to hit the fan. Like, you could feel presence around the house, drops of temperature, all the good stuff. She was very vague, but apparently she believes some kind of ghost is now possessing her house. Something apparently unleashed after that thing we did, and she started telling her friends about it, because nothing happened in the years prior. She then got back to England, but promptly came back here to escape from an abusive fiancé. At that point, I was really nervous, and I excused myself. She hugged me, says now there is only Christ in her heart, and that we should really have a cup of coffee. This gave me some really weird vibes, like weird cult stuff. I basically ran away terrified. Keep in mind, we split on good terms. Very good. She looked after my dog while I was in England. As a masseuse, she took care of my bad back for months. She even introduced me to her new boyfriend, and we went out for dinner a couple of times as a group. There is no way she could have held animus against me. Hell, once abroad, she even offered to help find a job for me in the city that she was currently living in. This was not a prank done to get back at me, and more so, her eyes. She was once the light of the room, always laughing and cracking jokes. The person that I found was sad, with very still eyes, not smiling, not anything. Like a completely different person. I am now a veteran after 23 years in the Royal Navy here in the UK. In around the year 1999, I was invited with my young family to a barbecue by a coworker. I agreed, so I turned up the following Saturday with my wife, our 2 boys and daughter, taking some beers and food. The day went fine, drinks flowing, food and music was great, and the kids were all entertained, and were enjoying playing with the host's kids and many friends. At the back fence was a large green area, so most of the boys gravitated there to play some variation of soccer, chase, or tag. You get the idea. Eventually everything wound down and people started heading off, until there were very few kids left. So the dads started stumbling around playing the same game with the boys left. We lived on the opposite side of the road, so there was no need to get a taxi or head home yet. This all seems normal, right? Well, around a month later, a news report broke about a serial killer who had preyed on young boys and who looked kind of familiar. Apparently he'd been doing it for years and burying the bodies not just around the world, but along the motorway between the base and his hometown. He looked familiar because he was one of the last to leave the barbecue, and the first to join in the games with the boys. Luckily for my family, I suppose, he preferred 18 to 20-year-old boys that he could control and manipulate. My boys were only 4 and 7. He was actually convicted for 2, but they suspect that he had around 20 victims, 1 being a girl. And there were unsolved disappearances that coincided with his whereabouts and postings. Hi, Raven. This is my second submission only. I appreciate you giving us a place to hear these stories and not feel crazy, so thank you. I get ghost visitors mainly. I've been getting ghost visitors since I was a young child. I would even talk to them. Eventually, I was getting scary ghosts coming, and so I began fearing them. I recently opened my eyes to how I have been giving my power to these ghosts. More and more, I seemed to have attracted negative energy from the ghost realm, but I think it was from my fear of them. As I grew up, I was metaphorically running away from them. I was usually alone when they'd come, and I eventually hated their visits. But this year, 2024, I had my first, quote, alien visit. My husband and I were in bed. It was dark, approximately 2 a.m. For the first time ever, one came when I was not alone. I was shocked. I instantly turned my head, seeing my husband was beside me. I, for the first time, confronted the intrusive visitor. I stopped, quote, running away by pretending to be asleep and being scared out of my mind. Something inside me woke up unconsciously to protect my husband from its dark energy. I wouldn't have it. If it was Satan himself, I would stop him. Above me, as I was lying in bed, was a floating alien head inside a circular black smoke. No body, only the head. The smoke moved constantly, slowing in a circular formation. I felt the entity had ill intentions. My husband was sleeping beside me. I turned my head back to the alien head floating above me in fury. It too was looking at my husband in those seconds as I was, but it was smirking at my husband when I looked back at it. And that pissed me off even more. I did not fear it. Something inside me woke up. The protector. I spoke to it in fury, but from my mind, I knew it could hear me. How dare you come here with him here? It looked at me at the same time I looked back at it. I stared up at its glowing red eyes furiously, and I felt that my eyes were just as red. It did not speak. I said for it to go away now. It poofed away as instantly as it appeared, and I went back to normal. I was no longer mad, and my protector's side in me went back to sleep. So now, when I get intrusive visitors, you feel them coming into your force field or in your dreams trying to possess you. I'm aware of their presence, and I internally confront them, not afraid. I no longer run away. I ask them internally, why are you here? What do you want? Go away. If they don't, I tell them, God's light is in you too, and God's love is in you too. He is here and where you are. Connect to God because you are capable as I am capable to talk to him. They usually disappear then. Thanks again, and I appreciate you reading my story.